I'm Rob Port from SayAnythingBlog.com, North Dakota's most popular political blog. It seems that Heidi Heitkamp's had something of an election year conversion to fiscal conservatism. Let me read you a quote from the Fargo Forum where she talks about her support for a balanced budget amendment. Where in the past, she says, I haven't always been a big fan of amending the Constitution to take care of things that legislators and public servants can do all on their own. I've been persuaded in the last year. Now, she said this apparently in a conference call with state and national reporters, and I think it's interesting. I'm a little suspicious of somebody who goes from, leading pep rallies in favor of Obamacare to supporting a balanced budget amendment when she decides to run for the U.S. Senate. That sets off flares in my mind. I guess I would be a little bit more comfortable with somebody who came to fiscal conservatism because it's something that they always believed, or at least didn't come to it, while they're trying to run a campaign for the U.S. Senate. But if she was genuine in her support for a balanced budget amendment, setting skepticism aside, I would consider that to be a positive thing. The problem is that the sort of balanced budget amendment she proposes is only for about roughly 1/3 of the budget. Let me quote from the Fargo Forum. However, Heitkamp said she would want some flexibility in requiring a balanced budget, so exceptions could be made in the case of wartime and entitlement spending. In supporting such a measure, Heitkamp says she wants to exempt Social Security and Medicare so there's no impact on those spending obligations. Now, that's problematic, and let me explain to you why. Discretionary spending. Now, this is all the spending that's not mandatory spending. Mandatory spending is entitlement spending, Social Security, Medicare, the interest on the national debt, things like that. Discretionary spending is a little over $1 trillion. As a matter of fact, there's a debate on that right now. The Ryan budget introduced yesterday sets discretionary spending at $1.028 trillion. The Budget Control Act from last year sets discretionary spending at $1.047 trillion. Democrats are upset that the Ryan budget doesn't reach that 1.047 cap on spending and are claiming that Republicans have reneged on their deal. The problem, of course, is that was a cap that was in the Budget Control Act, and there's nothing that says that spending can't be below that cap. It's just that spending can't be over that cap. Anyway, I digress. Discretionary spending, even per the next budget, is going to be somewhere between 1.028 and 1.047 trillion. Either way, little over $1 trillion. Non-discretionary spending, or let's get more specific than that, Social Security, Medicare, and the interest on the national debt, which are three things we can't touch, right? According to Heidi Heitkamp, she doesn't want to touch those things. Those add up to $2.3 trillion. So, and the whole national budget is closing in on $4 trillion. So between these two things, we've got the majority of the budget. Heidi Heitkamp doesn't want to touch Social Security and Medicare. So essentially, she wants to balance the budget, but only 1/3 of the budget. Because discretionary spending is only $1 trillion, Social Security, Medicare, and the interest on the national debt are over $2 trillion. So it's actually less than 1/3 of the national budget that she wants to balance. How can you balance a budget that way? How can you balance a budget while leaving those other things out? You can't. As a matter of fact, you could eliminate, when you consider that our annual budget deficit is over $1 trillion. Over $1 trillion a year. Is $1.3 trillion last year. It's set to be another $1.3 trillion this year, according to the CBO. We can eliminate every single penny of that discretionary spending, whether it's $1.028 trillion or $1.047 trillion. Every single penny. That would mean no money for roads, no money for bridges, no money for the military, no money for anything. The national parks, all of that stuff. Cut. No discretionary spending at all. We could cut every single dime of it, and we would still be running a budget deficit that's in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Because that's our annual budget deficit. Is over $1 trillion. Now, obviously, we're not going to cut all those things. But it also means that if we want to truly balance the budget, you literally can't do it unless you go after the entitlement programs, unless you reform Social Security and you reform Medicare. You can't do it. And yet Heidi Heitkamp says she's for a budget amendment that would do that. This literally means that Heidi Heitkamp is for doing something that is mathematically impossible to the national budget. I mean, this isn't just a conservative saying that her way of balancing the budget as a liberal Democrat is a bad idea and it won't work. This is math. This is 2 + 2 = 4. This is, you can't balance a budget that has a $1.3 trillion budget deficit on just a little over $1 trillion worth of spending. You can't do it. It's impossible. And yet, that's what she's proposing, which kind of makes you wonder, just how serious is she about that proposal? Not very serious, I think.